Welcome. We're joined by political consultant and CivilNet host and commentator, Eric Hacopian. Eric, thank you very much for your time again.
Pleasure.
So Armenia is a parliamentary system. Can you explain what this means in relation to the current political crisis going on?
Well, Armenia was a presidential system where the most powerful figure was the president until the reforms of 2015. I think it was in December of 2015 where they passed constitutional reform, which switched the country from a presidential system to a parliamentary system. And it's the parliamentary system that they outlined, it's very much close to the English-British model, which is if you have 50+1 of the parliament, it's essentially a 5-year dictatorship, in which it's a democratic dictatorship, in which you can do whatever you want within the context of your party if you have that mandate, which is the situation we have right now. What's ironic is that in 2015, the current political forces were lined up in opposite sides. The people on the street that are demanding for Pashinyan to leave were exactly the people who were pushing for this. And the people in power were the ones who opposed this referendum. And because the original intent of this in 2015 was to allow Serge Sarkisyan to serve his 2 terms as president and come back as prime minister in a prime ministership that was even more powerful than his presidency, except it entirely backfired and it ended up putting the person in office that they most dislike and gave him the ultimate powers that they wanted for themselves. So the current system that we have is not amenable to change unless there's a massive popular movement. That party has no reason to give up power. Legally, it has that 5-year mandate. Now the party itself can change its leadership or call new elections, which I think is something that we need in the near term. But from a legal perspective, they have a 5-year mandate, and the way that the Constitution was written, there's not much anybody can do about it.
And some think the state bureaucracy in Armenia acts as a job creation scheme rather than for any specific societal needs. Can you outline exactly how the system works?
Well, I think to a great extent, the state apparatus, which is large, inept for the most part, it's very much designed like a political machine. It was designed like a political machine back in the day, especially during the period of the former regime's rule. And essentially, you have hundreds of thousands of people with low salaries, but salaries that can be counted on to support your party and campaign for you when the time comes. So it was set up sort of like the political machines in major cities in the United States back in the day. So it's not designed for productivity. It's not designed to be most conducive of, making the state work or making the place attractive. It's essentially, it's the basis of a political machine. So you have hundreds of thousands of people who have consistent, low or mid-level salaries, and they're quite content with that. But what they do and what they accomplish and what good they do for the state is negligible for the most part. So, and it's also a great misallocation of resources because you're better off having, we've had private sector job shortages until, the COVID hit. Everywhere you walked around, there were every small business person complained about not having enough staff. They couldn't find people. So I think it creates misallocations in the economy and the labor force, and it's not conducive to the long-term prospects of the country.
Do you think almost that system, the Armenian civil service and the way it operates, the bureaucratic fashion in which it operates, contributes to certain individuals that many think may be incompetent kind of securing their positions?
Absolutely. I mean, essentially, from what I have understood, the civil service system that we have is modeled on the French, which has very strong civil service protections. It is next to impossible to fire an incompetent person in the Armenian bureaucracy. They'll have an absurd level of rights. And again, some of these things are good things. You don't want people being fired for political reasons. So you want to have those protections. But if you're going to have a French-style civil service protection, you would hope that you would have something similar to a French-style effectiveness in your bureaucracies, which we're not even anywhere close to. So instead of the system ends up preventing better, younger, more qualified people from taking positions and protects people who shouldn't be there.
And what would be needed to change that? Would governmental change?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there'll be tremendous pushback on this. And remember, because so many people work for the state, any kind of a reform like this is politically dangerous for anybody in power. But it needs to happen. And one way to do it, which has been done in other places, is you can retire people early. You know, you start getting rid of people above 50 by offering them pensions to leave, so you can thin the ranks of the bureaucracy, rationalize it, and bring in newer, younger people that are more functional in the state apparatus.
And I also want to talk about the War Truth Commission, about setting up a War Truth Commission. How could it structurally be set up, and what legal provisions would have to be observed?
Well, I don't know the exact legal provisions, because you need to be a constitutional expert on that, and I'm not. However, there's two ways to do it, and there's politics involved here. Obviously, there's a committee in the parliament that oversees the military, and they could do it. But the last time they did it for the April 2016 war. Their report came out, I think, a week before this war started, or a week or 2 weeks before this war started. So it tells you how ineffective or ridiculous that system is. Unfortunately, I don't see anything that's coming out of the state sector that will have the credibility that people will trust. It needs to be mandated by the state, but it needs to be an independent commission that can look at everything, most importantly, recommend reforms that need to happen. I don't see that coming out of, if it comes out of the parliament, most people are not going to trust it. If it comes out of the military, they won't trust it at all. What you need is an independent commission. I suspect that there are aspects of the law that will allow you to do that. I'm not an expert on that. But what we need is an independent commission that has the right to question everyone and everything and give recommendations quickly about how we reform the military. Because I believe that the reform of the military is key in reforming the state. That's the first step in doing so.
And as for the PM, last weekend there was a lot of talk, rumors that the Prime Minister was going to resign on Monday. Monday came and Pashinyan did not resign. What did you think when you were observing all of that?
Well, I mean, I saw all of those things, and the more I look at this, I mean, we all heard those rumors, you know, texts late at night and this and back and forth about there's a meeting here, a meeting there. The problem is this, I think the PM will be open to going and leaving, but the right people have to ask. I mean, overall, there's two kinds of people that oppose their prime minister. There's the people who oppose their prime minister for all the right reasons, which is what they see as ineptitude in leading to the war, lack of leadership, or mistakes during the war. And those are all entirely legitimate issues. Then there's the people who oppose him for all the wrong reasons. And that's mostly the 17 parties and people on the street. And what they oppose him, they'll say they oppose him for his ineptitude in the war, but that's really not the case. What they really oppose him for is for the reforms before the war that essentially cut down the power of the oligarchs, improve tax collection. You know, our budget went up by $1 billion over a year. They hate him for all the good things that he did. So what we need to do is for people to divide and get behind, for people who want him to leave, they need to get behind the opposition that's there, which is silent right now and not on the street, that oppose him for the mistakes he made and not be associated with people who want him to go because of the good things that he did. So we have this dichotomy, which is quite problematic. But given knowing him and who he does not like, he's not going to leave because 2,000 people, 3,000 people on the street lined up with all the discredited people from the past. That's just not going to happen, especially once we talked about the structural system that we have, which is not going to force him to leave at all.
It could almost make him more likely to stay,
yes,
in a sense. And finally, I want to ask about the situation in Khıtsabert and Himtagher, that 60 Armenian soldiers have reportedly been captured, just as over 40 Armenian POWs were returned to Yerevan. What is going on with regards to the situation of POWs?
I think it's very clear that the other side is lying about how many people they have. It's becoming clear just from videos and things. And this is really an act of state terrorism. We've seen a lot of wars. The Arabs and the Israelis fought countless wars. The Egyptians weren't holding Israeli civilians, and the Israelis weren't holding Egyptian military, personnel for weeks and months after the war ended. There's absolutely no reason for this. So these are very cynical attempts to essentially create dissension and weaken our state structures, because not being able to protect your citizens is humiliating for any country. So I think what's needed here is, one, for us not to lose our nerve and not let them, get away with these intimidations. And secondly, to be very united in pushing on all fronts, through the Russians, through other forces, and embarrassing them as what they are, which is, act as state sponsors of terrorism. Normal states do not act like this. War ends, everybody goes home. But what they're trying to do is to intimidate and create this level of uncertainty. And we need to be very strong in not losing our nerve, not losing our composure, but in a very strong way demanding our rights and demanding the release of these people. They have no reason to kidnap civilians that happened during the war. They have no reason to hold those. 60 soldiers, well, the war ended. They need to come back. We just got 44 of them back. So what we're dealing with is not a normal state. We're dealing with, essentially, it's an aspect of international terrorism. And we need to be united, speak in one voice, and make a stink out of this in such a way where they can't get away with this.
Well, Eric, a pleasure as always.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.